All right, guys, welcome back. This is another video at the Combat Athlete YouTube channel. And today we have a special guest, Josh Peacock, and I'll let him do his own introduction, if you will.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
absolutely.
I'm the infamous Josh Peacock. No, I'm just kidding. Greg is a lot more infamous than I am. But I have been a little bit inflammatory on
Perfect.
YouTube lately
Good.
in threads. I don't like threads, but I don't how I keep getting drawn back on there.
I need to make one.
Um, if you have an Instagram, you already have one. You just need to
Okay,
activate
yeah, that's right.
it.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. But if you don't know my name already, I run a podcast called Combat Learning. Me and Scott Seavright runs Primal MMA coaching podcast, which I highly recommend as well. We were the first guys to start making content in really at all in this space way back in 2020 during the pandemic. And so my podcast is totally dedicated to the constraints-led approach, the ecological dynamics as it is applied and expressed through combat sports.
Nice. Yeah, the Combat Learning Podcast, man, I've been listening. You just had Ian Renshaw on, right?
I had him on last season, so like last year sometime.
Okay. I just saw some of
Yeah.
or like a recent video was posted with him, and I didn't know if it was
Oh yeah,
old or.
yeah, because I just started posting. I'm so you you think I weren't so my day job is marketing, but you'd never figure it out based on how I went about combat learning. So I just started posting everything to YouTube. Um, and I started putting some longer clips on YouTube of
Yeah,
some of
yeah,
the
that's
really
what I
good
was
stuff from.
watching. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what you saw. Yeah,
Oh,
that was a
right
little
on.
while ago, but yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, and I've been using this ecological approach to approach patient care, but we'll leave that for another day. Particularly with
Hmm.
combat athletes, and it works wonders, and you just see the behaviors emerge in an amazing way whenever you give people the right feedback. And so let's just start here. I want to hear the ecological approach dynamics definition, and
Hmm.
then we'll talk about why it outperforms the competing model or the information processing model, and we'll
Hmm.
particularly gear that towards martial artists. So go for it.
Sure. So ecological dynamics. I mean, you should. It's so deep and expansive that it's difficult to summarize, but I'm going to do it anyways.
All right, sweet.
It it's I tell people that ecological dynamics is a theory of learning and skilled behavior, um, and a motor control. So motor control, learning, and skilled behavior. And the reason why it's called ecological is because one half of the theory is a synthesis of J.J. Gibson's work in ecological psychology. And the point of ecological psychology, and really anywhere where you kind of hear the word ecological used, is that we're not only considering the organism and the internal processes of the organism, but also how the task and the environment, chiefly the environment, uh, influences the way that we behave. So in a combat sports context, the biggest environmental influence on your behavior is going to be your partner, right? The person that you're
Right.
the person that you are sparring or fighting against. Um, Dynamics. I mean, anyone familiar with dynamics? Dynamics is really about the causes, right? The dynamics is about the forces that cause things to happen. So with ecological dynamics, we're talking about behavior that is shaped by an entire ecosystem,
Right on.
and not simply the organism itself, which is more how the information processing approach views skill behavior, that everything is internal. It's about the exact biomechanics. It's about schema and things that are inside of your head. Um, Whereas ecological dynamics is more about what is actually happening in the environment. And you're part of that. So your internal states do matter, but it's 1/3 of the equation, not
Right.
2/3 or 2.5 2/3.
Thirds, yeah. Yeah, 2.5 out of 3 years. Yeah. But yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah, that's a great explanation. And one part I try to really make clear is that you cannot separate the environment and the task in the
Hmm.
individual, and
Right.
that's huge. Once you start to
Hmm.
conceptualize that, like I was saying with Greg, like you really start to change the way that you live and perceive behavior even outside of the coaching environment. And I'm
Hmm.
I'm not a coach, I'm a clinician, and so I'm really fascinated in talking to folks like you and Greg who actually coach. And you're so I kind of skipped over that. I forget, I failed to mention it, but you got your master's degree, right? In it was like educational psychology or teaching and learning or something like that.
Yeah, teaching and learning. So I did half of it was in educational psychology, half of it was actually in English.
Oh shit. Okay.
Teaching people how to write. So communication and writing and literature and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Yeah. One of my undergrads was in Spanish, so I got a lot of literature. A lot of literature we had to read, but that's awesome, dude.
Awesome.
You're so if you don't mind me asking, was your thesis centered around something like martial arts for skill acquisition, or was it something different?
Yeah. I did like a more of like a practicum instead of a thesis, but I
Oh,
did
okay.
do a capstone, and it was a long paper. They didn't call it a thesis, but it was a long paper, and it was on the effects of exercise interventions on academic performance inside of a class.
Exercise interventions. Interesting. The PT in
Yes.
me wants to
Yes.
hear more about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Are
So
you talking about like not like corrective exercise, but like actually exercising, like getting the heart rate up, things like that?
yeah, yeah. Uh,
Really?
Preferably in most of the cases where they tested it, it had something to do with the subject, but it was exercise. It was a game of some sort, or yeah, yeah. And especially well with the entire student body, it increased focused, increased focused. It actually helped with behavioral issues. So behavior management became easier and academic performance improved. So
Wow.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the academic performance improved and the students comported themselves better in a classroom setting with with
right.
it
Yeah.
with exercise built into the lesson or whatever, I guess.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. They would do it at different points. I think sometimes they do it in the middle or they do it at the start and then, or they do it, yeah. I'm trying to, I mean, it was, whew,
That
I
seems
haven't
a
thought
bit
about
like
that in
that seems a
years,
bit
but
more like the differential learning side of things rather than the constraint-led approach. Like you
um,
kind of introduce a little bit of chaos or a little bit of randomness into the day,
yeah.
or was it?
Well, most of the interventions were related to the subject somehow, so it's not entirely random.
Oh, okay, okay.
Uh,
I thought I'm
yeah. And
picturing like I don't know the study design, but I was picturing like all right, get up and do like 10 jumping jacks or something. Yeah. Yeah.
you know what? I used to do that in my Taekwondo class. I would randomly, it is, I mean, it is incredible for behavior management.
Right on.
Um, and the younger the kids get, the easier it is to run the class without that many incidents. Um, and with really young kids, you've got to keep things moving. You can't make them sit at attention
Yeah.
for more than 10 seconds. I used to make a game out of it because so that I could demonstrate to the parents that at least we were doing a little bit of
Yeah.
something discipline
Right.
related, or at least that they
Yeah.
recognize as discipline. I believe that task switching is discipline too, but in following directions and things like that. But the parents want to see the military stuff, so
Oh, of
uh,
course, of course.
I
You got to
gave
give
them a
them
little bit of that.
you got to give them at least the illusion that some of that's going on.
Yeah,
But
with their 4-year-olds, right?
yeah, right, right. So let's talk about. And by the way, talking about 4-year-olds, you're a much better person than I am, man. I've tried my best to treat children. I just and you hit on it. The reason that I can't really see myself long term in like a pediatric clinic would be because of the parents. Like it's just you got to treat them and you got to treat the parents. And I'm not saying that I don't like being a kid with kids. And I mean, if the ecological model works wonders for children. They are like that's how they
Yeah.
behave. It's just
Yes.
if you constrain them the proper way. But um,
Hmm.
But anyway, so let's talk about some of the vocabulary we've been using because we haven't defined it for the audience yet. So constraints, if we're going to go down the constraint-led approach version of, or because we've got differential learning, constraint-led approach. So let's talk
Yeah.
about constraints and affordances.
Okay.
Just kind of give me your synopsis on, or you know, it has to be a synopsis. Just kind of talk freely about constraints and affordances and how it relates to martial arts.
Sure. Can I back up really
Yeah,
quick
go ahead.
with the differential learning
Oh,
versus
sorry.
CLA thing?
Did I say something? Did I?
No, no. There's something that's kind of, so the ecological approach. This is everyone's calling, and that's, I mean, it's fine. You know, it's not wrong. Um, Rob Gray, he kind of buckets differential learning and the constraints-led approach under the ecological approach,
Yeah.
because differential learning is a self-organization view. Um, the clarification I want to add there is that differential learning is quite different. Like a pure differential learning is quite different from constraints-led approach, and the differential learning per its creator, Wolfgang Schulhorn, is not based on ecological dynamics.
Okay,
So
so
you
I thought
can
it was kind
use,
of the umbrella. I thought it was kind of
yeah,
like an umbrella, like within the ecological approach, you had differential learning, which what Schoellhorn's doing, and then or yeah, it's currently doing, and then you had something like the constraint-led approach with like Carl Newell and Ian Renshaw and
yeah.
all those guys.
They're so they get along a
Okay,
lot of, so the differential learning is really useful within a constraints-led approach.
hmm.
But there are things, there's a there's a few people doing pure differential learning for jujitsu, and it looks very, very different than anything I would recommend
I would
or that
imagine.
I teach to anybody.
Nice. Okay.
Um, so I mean, you can be constraints led. I'm a constraints led guy. I'm not a differential
Yeah,
learning guy.
same.
I think it's a useful thing to play with in terms of variability, but yeah.
Yeah, I
So
don't know enough
ecological,
about it.
you are right. The term ecological approach, that's Rob Gray is the one that really, Dr. Rob Gray is the one that really
Right.
popularized that term, and he's the one that bucketed them together. So
Okay.
it's not wrong. You just have to understand that differential learning is not underpinned by an ecological dynamics theory.
Okay.
And
I
so
did not
if
know
you
that.
dive into differential learning too far, you might find yourself very far outside of
Okay.
the key principles of ecological dynamics.
Sweet. No,
So
thanks for
that
that
that leads us
clarification.
back to constraints.
Right. No, yeah, thanks for that clarification. I'm writing it down actually because I hadn't heard that because I listened to a lot of Rob Gray. He actually just he
Mhm.
uploaded a new podcast going over it's like coaches' ability to identify movement, expert coaches, and it was super
Mhm.
fascinating. But yeah, I didn't know that. So
Yeah.
yeah, let's go to constraints.
Yeah. So constraints. So one of the major contributors to, in fact, the other half of ecological dynamics is dynamical systems theory, which is that it applies across, it's like a physics kind of thing. It applies
Okay.
all over the place. And a major figure within that is Carl Newell, who's a very important psychologist. He studied motor development over the lifespan. And with one of his, I think it was his main paper on constraints, but I don't, it's been a long time since I read it. He observed how babies acquire basic motor skills or motor behaviors as they age, with and made the observation that it's we don't give them copious amounts of instruction. We don't give them verbal instruction because they haven't even, in most cases, even acquired language yet.
Right.
So how is it that they come to develop these motor behaviors, these key motor behaviors that we end up using everywhere all throughout our lives? Um, and that is through his theory of constraints. He postulated the theory of constraints. Constraint is anything that limits the degrees of freedom you have for your behavior or your movements. So your body can move nearly an infinite amount of ways. So the interesting problem here is when you enter a novel situation that you have to navigate, be it sports, walking through a park, running through a crowd, uh, navigating your house, things are messy, you're moving, there's stuff all over the place, it's not familiar. It is rarely the case that you do nothing. It's rarely the case that you don't have some sort of movement assemblage that you put together in order to address those movement problems. And so they might not be optimal. In fact,
Right.
usually they aren't. I mean, walking through a crowd, we get pretty good at that. But, you might trip. You got stuff, you got a weight over here and a box over here, and you're looking at the clock, and you don't remember that the box is here because it's not usually there, and you trip over it, right?
Right.
Um, if you don't if you trip, you're going to do something. The question is why? Because you have so many degrees of freedom. How is it you come to organize movements, even if you've never practiced it before, or you haven't become skilled at it? And that is what a constraint is. So the environment constrains you, your structure, your psychology, your organismic attributes constrain you. And then the task that you engage in constrains you. And so all of these things cut away options,
Right.
options that that your movement system will never consider, and narrows you into a certain range of movement. So if you trip over a box, I mean, the first thing you're going to do is try to protect your head and probably your midsection from hitting the ground at maximum forces. So you're probably going to post your arms out. If you're a little bit more athletic and you've caught yourself, you might hop, right? It just depends on what your intrinsic dynamics are, right?
Right.
Your organismic
So I
constraints.
think they call them action capacities, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um,
I think that's what Ron
yeah.
Gray calls them. I'm not sure. Yeah. Action capacity. Yeah.
Yeah. Action capacity. I mean, that would definitely fall under that. Like how you stop yourself from falling on the ground. It's going to
Right.
be, you're going to have more options, and increasingly more crazy and athletic and creative options.
Right.
The more athletic and in shape you are. um,
Sweet. So
kids are
how do we constrain the environment to afford, essentially? So let's talk about affordances now.
okay. Yeah. So an affordance is an opportunity for action that presents itself in the environment. And the way that an affordance becomes detectable to you is based on your relationship with the environment. And so more affordances become available to you, the more that your relationship changes with the environment, and your ability to act upon those affordances increases as you become more familiar with navigating that environment. So, to change the relationship with your environment, I mean, there's several ways to do it. You can somebody can give you a task, and it might be to do something with an object that you didn't think you could do to the object before. It was unknown to you. And so you kind of tentatively poke and prod around and do things, and then you find, oh, okay. And now that changes your relationship to the object, and you can you'll know exactly where to look and what to do when you see the object. It can also be by your own exploration. When I was younger, I did a lot of, grew up in Taekwondo, and I did demo team and XMA, and which is extreme
Oh,
martial
dude, me
arts.
too. That's my
Did you really?
background. Yeah, yeah, demo
Awesome.
team. Yeah, so I've actually heard you say you're fourth dan. I was a second dan black belt when I stopped. And I mean, obviously you've got like the Poomsae, which is like the form expression, things like that. But
hmm
but the
hmm
demo teams, man, that brought me way back when you said that. Holy cow. Awesome.
Dude, demo team was my life for a while, man.
Dude,
That's the
oh my gosh.
half the reason why I showed up.
I was like the youngest kid and I could do like back handsprings or like a back tuck. because I had a
Nice.
background in gymnastics. And so they wanted me to learn how to do a back handspring. And while I was on my hands, like kick boards behind me and break, it worked like half the time. But every time it did, we ended up winning the demo because it was just like,
Nice.
that was awesome, dude. But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut
Yeah.
you off, but you said demo team, and
No,
that
it's all
brought me
right.
way back. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
so I took a liking to that. That was around the time, well, a year or two after that, tricking and parkour became something that kind of transcended
Oh,
martial
nice.
arts. Most of the people involved had probably some martial arts experience, but there were people that never had any martial arts experience. People might remember Juji Mufu from back in the day.
Oh,
He's still
absolutely.
around.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
still around
Jacked.
and
Yeah. I love
huge
Jubilee
and
Bufu.
jacked
Yeah.
and
Super
yeah, but he
athletic.
back in the day, oh my gosh, yes, a freak. He's an absolute freak. And he could still do that stuff even though he's way bigger than he used to be back in the day.
Right.
So yeah, I was watching these guys in the early day, like the twilight, not the twilight, the dawn of YouTube.
Yeah.
Back when you still had like a MySpace
Yeah.
kind of
Like
profile on there.
2009. Yeah.
Yep, yep. And so I'd never tried to do like a wall run or a wall jump, but and I didn't know how to do it. I didn't watch any instructionals. I had seen somebody do it before, and I was like, well, okay. So I just started kicking off the wall,
Yeah.
and then I realized, okay, I need to go at this angle. I need to do this with my foot, and then I can get 2 or 3 steps and then jump off when gravity's kind of pulling me too much. And so my relationship to the wall regarding that task changed because I didn't know if I could do it before, and I certainly didn't know how. I just kind of had an inkling that it was possible.
Right.
Um, and so there's any number of ways that you kind of very slowly extend the edge of your knowledge of what might be possible. And then you poke and you prod and you search and then you find things. Sometimes you find things that you totally didn't expect. And sometimes you can
Right.
confirm things that you sort of suspected but didn't really know.
It's funny
Yeah,
you bring up parkour, man, because when I heard Rob Gray talking about sometimes coaches can make affordances seem more attractive, right?
right.
How do you make affordances more attractive?
Mhm.
And I was like, dude, the largest field of affordances ever have to be in the minds or the bodies of parkour guys, like free runners. Like just because they always like everything that they see is there's some sort of action that can be taken. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
so that's great
yeah,
you brought that up.
yeah. Truly a landscape. We like to talk in terms of a landscape of affordances.
Right.
For
Yeah.
most activities, it's kind of an analogy, but in terms of parkour, it is
Oh,
literally
it's
a
definitely a landscape.
landscape
Right.
of
So,
affordances.
so
But,
let's talk about specifically with martial arts, right? So
mhm,
good coaches will constrain the environment and afford the opportunity for a behavior to arise that may be a weakness of some sort or
mhm.
something that they want to say. What would it sound like for a coach for people who've never really even heard of this before on my channel? What would it sound like for a coach to maybe recognize something that's a behavior that's emerging that we don't, or maybe an attractor if we want to use the language,
Mhm.
and how would you constrain the environment to maybe afford certain behaviors to arise that may not have been afforded otherwise?
Yeah. So that's the constrained to afford
Right,
um, principle that you mentioned before. It's one of the key principles of
right,
the constraints-led approach. Constrained to afford in this is not an exact science yet,
right.
and it might never be, to be honest with you. You're gonna have to use your expertise as a coach in this martial art of yours or the sport that you teach, and you're gonna have to experiment. And so, um, a great example of this is you can design a game where there are multiple win conditions, where one win condition actually creates the condition for you to enact the other win condition. So in grappling, um, Cal Jones, a judo CLA guy, has a bunch of really great games. On one of the episodes of my podcast, he talked about a game where for foot sweeps, where you basically either you can sweep the guy off his feet or you can drag him out of the ring. And so when you pull and drag, you're kind of stuck in a in a static position. And a lot of times either you're upright or you drop your weight a little bit. Either way, you shift your weight in a way that you can just sweep a guy's leg out from under his feet. And that's one of the ways that you can do that,
Okay.
is to create a game, kind of cleverly design a game where there's multiple win conditions, and one win condition actually makes you vulnerable to a different way of of winning. Like the typical pass sweep game, like positional sparring game, is an okay example of that as well, because in the process of trying to pass guard, the top player will often put pressures on you and move his legs in ways where you can exploit and get sweeps.
Right.
In some cases, even, set up like a triangle choke or something. But um, that's actually not a bad example of it. But there are ways you can scale things down and simplify even the pass sweep, in ways to kind of make that, to encourage that more to emerge.
Okay.
Trying to think of an example of that. I think
So
one way you could. Oh yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say. So let's say you've got somebody who's training MMA, right? Or let's say he does Muay Thai, and he
Mhm.
recognizes a weakness in his game, and he wants to try to. And this is hard because maybe there's nobody else. Well, let's just add that in. Let's say there's nobody else in the gym that it really kind of focuses on the constraint-led approach, and it's just a really traditional gym. What are some things that they could do to try to implement this on their own? Or
Mhm.
and I know ideally you would have another partner because that is the environment, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so what would you say to them? Like, what are the first steps to take to be able to kind of take their training in their own hands and maybe employ this a little bit?
Yeah, I think the most readily available thing is to make maximal use of open mat time if you have it. Um, I
Right.
think most
Okay.
places have it, not all of them do. Um, and it's actually not super uncommon for, especially like blue, purples, and up, to like basically put constraints on themselves. I'm like, let's just start from this position. I want to practice
Right.
defending here. So it's not that weird for you to um it's not that weird for you to set constraints on yourself. So use open mat time, talk to your partner, put the games together ahead of time, really, if you want to play there, and then find somebody who's willing to play those games with you. The other thing you can do is when you use sparring time during regular classes, you can. It depends on your instructor and what your instructor allows you to do.
Right.
But if your instructor doesn't let you like just total flat out play a game that isn't free sparring, um, you can set constraints on yourself. So you can try and play around with setting constraints on yourself,
This is what
and
I
seeing
do.
how that works out. If you're really lower belt, mm,
Yeah.
kind of hard to do that because you're just kind of surviving from everywhere.
Right.
If you're a little bit more experienced, it's going to work a lot better for you. Uh,
Yeah,
and
because you have to
I
be able
think,
to know what you need to work on, and at a lower, if you're at a lower
mm,
belt, it's like, well, you just got to work on everything. It's,
yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah, yes. So, and the last thing you can do is try to, this is the most logistically difficult, is to just get dudes who want to get extra rolling time and go to somebody's house or your house, or maybe the coach will let you use downtime on the mat or something, and you can put together an informal group that wants to get
right.
extra. I didn't end up going to a lot of these, but I've had people be like, "Hey man, I've got some mats in my room. You guys want to like come over one time during the week and get some extra rolling?" Um, and a lot of people will be into that.
Oh
So,
yeah, absolutely.
just
That's
find
what
the
I
right
did with the
guys.
wrestlers that I was talking to you about earlier, man. I was just like, hey,
Oh, sweet,
I know you guys
sweet.
are itching to wrestle because you wrestled years ago and you're here. So,
Mhm.
so can we wrestle like somebody anyway? No, that's good. And because I've had this thought, and I've had, after I had the interview with Greg, people reach out and be like, hey, how do I do this? And I'm like, well, look, I'm not a coach. Like I implement this model in a medical sense, in a clinical practice sense. It's a little bit different. I use information as my main constraint, and there's a lot of ways we could talk
Mhm.
about that. But like, it's it. it really does seem like a daunting task in the world of martial arts because, as I'm sure you've known, being having created this content for what, going on 4 years now. I mean, you're
Four
butting heads
years.
with a
Yeah.
lot of people. It's just kind of like, yeah, this is the way it's been done, and there's really not
Hmm.
any other way that it can be done in my mind,
Yep.
right? So no, that's a good. I mean, you kind of just have to lean on your partners and hope that you've got good training partners, essentially, if you want to keep that aliveness in training. Um, all right, so I listened to one of your podcasts, and it was with a strength coach, and you guys were talking about, I think it was like a two-factor approach or something like that.
Two-factor
And
model.
right, two-factor model, which is, really driven by sport. I mean, this pretty common knowledge in sports science, right? You got strength that's non-specific, and
Hmm.
harness that within your sport. And then
Hmm.
conditioning is preferably done within the sport, right? If you can get similar physiological adaptations within the sport that you would doing some other like cardiovascular exercise, then you need to do it within the sport. But there seems to be this, and I've got a video up on my channel about it. I get questions about it all the time about shin conditioning, and it's one of these things where you it sounds pretty pseudoscientific on its face because the idea of shin conditioning that we've seen is like Muay Thai guys kicking banana trees and
Hmm.
like kicking the poles and stuff. But it turns out that if you've got a good resistance training regimen and you do plyometric exercise, which happens most of the time within our sport, that you can actually start to influence bone remodeling in your shins locally or in your knuckles for knuckle conditioning if you do it right. There seems to be some good scientific precedent for it. But this kind of falls in between what I would consider strength training, right? Because it's specific, like I want it to happen to a certain bone, but it's
Yeah.
it's not something that I can really do in live training because it just drastically increases the risk for injury in the person that's being kicked, right? So
Yeah.
what if I have a set amount of time, and hopefully you can cite some literature here, or at least kind of open our eyes up a little bit to what the literature says on it. If I've got a certain amount of time that I train and I want a certain physiological adaptation, like shin condition, say I want to focus on that, I want to kick the heavy bag a bunch or whatever. What is the ratio of time I should spend reasonably so far or so as to not negatively impact my rate of skill acquisition in the actual sport?
Yeah. I think so. You're going to have to, I would prioritize skill acquisition, because you're going to adapt to the sport on just by engaging in the sport, especially if you're doing it through the constraints led approach. Um, one, Once you're adapted to the activity itself, then you can start thinking about exercises you can do to help enhance performance.
Right. Let's say that's where we are. Right. We've got
Yeah.
somebody who resistance trains. They've gotten good in their sport, or they're good as they want to be in their sport. They want to optimize their training. They want to start doing
Right.
some of these things. How do they
Hmm.
how do they plant that in without, I guess, mitigating the loss of skill?
Right. Yeah. So the main thing is to do it separate, in my opinion.
Right.
Especially if you're doing exercises that are really, really specific, that are
Yeah,
similar
like this
to
would be.
the,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like it's like a lot of
that are
kicking
similar
the
to the
a
actual
lot of kicking the
move.
heavy bag, a lot of punching the heavy
Hmm.
bag. And
Yep.
I would say, like the strength conditioning coach in me wants to say, do it within your sport. But I know that if in order to get the true physiological adaptation that you want locally to your shin, you can't just sit there and kick the shit out of your partner,
No. Yeah.
so it
Yeah.
it, it falls kind of in between this, like, all right, obviously do it separately. But I'm thinking more of like, how do you split your time? Like what's a
Hmm.
reasonable amount of time to spend on it in your let's say we've got a certain amount of time that we're training, like percentage wise.
Yeah. I mean, I would do at least. I That is such a difficult question
I
to
know,
answer. I
man.
would do at least, and I'm not a strength and I've been reading a lot about strength and conditioning, but I'm not a strength and conditioning guy. I would say that you need to do at least two 30-minute sessions of very sport specific conditioning if you're going to do that. Um,
Okay. Like
And if
in
you're
order
gonna
to
do,
mitigate the loss of skill? Is that what you're saying?
uh, no, I think you could do more than that without losing skill. Like
Okay.
without like eating into recovery or something, or interfering
Right.
with the attractors is a
Right.
Franz Bosch talks about that. Sometimes you can get what you can if the movement is too similar, sometimes it can mess with the attractor, which can
Yeah.
kind of screw with performance a little bit in the performance environment. I don't, even with like somebody like Franz Bosch, he's so far ahead of everybody from what I can tell, but he's like, yeah, we're in the infant stages of understanding of
Well,
transfer. I will
that's
say
what
you talk,
pioneers tend to say.
yeah, yeah, yeah. He's a pretty humble guy too. So,
Yeah.
um, So, uh, I think I actually so the strength and conditioning episode that you referenced, I don't think I agree anymore with their approach because
That's
it's
what
basically
I
just
was going to ask you.
general, yeah, it's basically just general strength training, max the general strength training out, and then maybe you can push the sled, but
Right.
the expression comes in the sport. I put I went through that program and I put like 100 pounds on my squat. I gained some muscle mass, and the only real difference I felt was from doing overhead presses. Really changed my affordance landscape for underhooks because I had a bad
Oh,
shoulder, and I started to fight for underhooks and feeling like I could actually fight without giving up, and because of my shoulder felt compromised.
yeah.
And so I didn't really feel the bench press really didn't do much for me. And so I don't think it's that you shouldn't do those exercises. I just think that are trying to, if you're trying to increase your performance in a sport, there has to be a translation. There has to be exercises that translate uh, the additional muscle growth that you've developed there. Um,
Okay.
Again, I don't know that much about the research yet, so it's kind of a new
No,
reading
not
journey for
so.
me.
I guess what I was trying to ask, not necessarily about. So the
Yeah.
evidence is there for whether strength. So whether you can actually condition your shins. When like there's a whole
Hmm.
systematic review just came out a couple years ago about the mechanical basis of bone remodeling, and there's some really good stuff in there that suggests that you can condition your shins pretty well as long as
Yeah.
as long as you're doing it right. But it seems to me where I'm having trouble is because, and you know more about these approaches than I do, that particularly when it comes to coaching, I find it hard giving advice on whether how long they should actually do because it doesn't take much. So
Hmm.
just for your knowledge, like when it comes to bone remodeling, you can
Yeah.
actually like there was a study done in Japan where these girls jumped up and down as high as they could 6 times in one day for 3 days out of the week, and their bone mineral density went up. So like it doesn't have to
Hmm.
be much, but does it
Right.
take how much time spent away from the sport
Hmm.
itself actually creates a loss of skill acquisition? Like let's say instead of me training 5 days a week just doing jujitsu or just doing Muay
Hmm.
Thai, I do 4 days a week. And that one day I spend half of the day doing shin conditioning. Like, does that negatively affect my skill acquisition? I guess is that
I don't
my
think so. I mean, four
okay.
four is a good number.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Four is a good number to be training throughout the week. You can, I think you need to be you can improve by going twice a week, and even more so by going 3 times a week. I don't know that going more than 4 times a week is necessary unless you're a professional athlete. I don't know.
Okay.
I feel like you might be getting diminishing returns in terms of recovery,
Okay.
and your time might actually be better spent on conditioning and general strength,
Okay.
um, than going like 5 or 6 times a week.
Okay. All right. No, that's good to know because I really had no idea like well, how much time do I tell them to take off of their training when,
Yeah.
I don't want them to lose skill because me as a physical therapist, my main job as a CLA physical therapist is like, you know, I am mitigating the loss of skill in the presence of pathology. And so I need to
Hmm.
know exactly how to afford the environments for them to actually explore their body in the presence of pain. But anyway, but the last thing
Yeah.
I'll say is that strength and conditioning, the two-factor guy,
Hmm.
that it was hard for me to listen to because in one sentence he said, you know, if you're going to employ the ecological approach, right? You you can't say in one sentence that don't tell your students to not use their strengths. And then in the next sentence be like, or use strength as a tool. And then in the next sentence be like, yeah, well, don't use your strength in that situation because if you're in a true ecological model, if that person is strong enough to never need the technique, then they never need it. The environment is presented to them in such a way that they don't ever need anything other than their strength. Now we know this is
Yeah.
not true because you're going to run into somebody who's stronger than you, right? But
Right.
like if I I was like, man, this guy's wish he's going back and forth. So and there's nothing against
Well,
him. I was
they're
just
not ecological. I won't I went through a phase where I was just trying to get out of, not get out of it, but like have other perspectives.
right. Oh, okay. I thought that was under the assumption he was
And it just doesn't
eco.
work that well. Yeah. No, no,
Okay.
no, they're not at all. Yeah,
Okay.
they're
Okay.
very traditional in their approach. Very, in some ways, I would describe them as boomerish with regard to strength and conditioning. They hate on the CSCS, and I'm sure there's stuff, I don't know anything about it, but I'm sure there's stuff in the CSCS that's not exactly the best. But
You talking about
um,
the CSCS credential?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I used to have it. When I came out of PT school, I had it, and yeah, I never re-upped it just because you know you don't really need to once you have the information and once you have the you know the knowledge of strength and conditioning. You know, it's just kind of like
Hmm.
an overqualified like alphabet soup. But I do think for a lot of people that who want to get into the strength and conditioning world, it's necessary. But I'll wrap this thing up. My last question to you is well, I guess I'm going to ask you for some advice for just the listener and people who want to be more involved in their own learning, right? So talk about some things that they may be able to read, even stuff on your website. I've heard you plug before, good stuff. And I know you've got like this little tool. I think you've got a tool that they can kind of look and or if I'm misrepresenting that, let me know. But give them some information about what they can actually like go. Oh, sorry. I forgot my light was there. Give them some information about what they could actually go do to find uh, actionable things to do and how they implement it into
Hmm.
their training.
Sure. I highly recommend a little book called The Constraints Led Approach.
Oh,
The main author is Ian Renshaw.
right.
I think
Keith
Keith
Davis, right?
Davids is on it too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I've got that
It's the
sitting in front
most
of me.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a short book. It's action packed. It summarizes ecological dynamics. Um, that's a great one to start with. It even simplifies the learning model and all that stuff.
Right.
Um, that's a great one to have. And I would actually probably start there. Um, if that feels too academic for you, I would get Rob Gray's How We Learn to Move. I would get it anyways, actually. I just get
That's also
it. Get
sitting over
both of
there.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Rob Gray's How We Learn to Move. I don't think it replaces the constraints led approach book, but it's really good introduction to how things work and how it's different from information processing. And if you want more practical advice from Rob Gray, he has a follow-up book about how to optimize movement. And I believe that's the title of it. Let's see. It's back here somewhere.
Yeah. I think it's
Yeah.
how we optimize
Learning to
movement or something like.
optimize movement.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
learning to optimize movement.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
over there.
by Dr. Rob
Like
Gray.
literally those three books in order are sitting right over there in my closet. That's awesome, dude.
Wavelength, dude. Yeah. If you want to dive nerd uh nerd autism deep, right? Like me.
The Tism deep. Yeah. Let's go.
I mean that in the most endearing and positive
Yeah.
way possible. The dynamics of skill acquisition is it's in its second edition now, and I do recommend the second edition. It's a textbook, so it's a little bit pricey. Highly recommend that. That overview is basically everything. It helps you understand ecological psychology, dynamical systems theory, Newell's theory of constraints, a full fleshed out learning model, and a lot about how it applies in different ways. And there's another book called Nonlinear Pedagogy and Skill Acquisition for Sport.
Okay.
That is by Nonlinear Pedagogy is you for all intents and purposes, it's basically the constraints-led approach. I think it's a little bit older than the constraints-led approach. Many of the operationalizing principles of constraints-led approach are in fact taken from nonlinear pedagogy, and that's by I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, Jia Chao. He nonlinear pedagogy is his thing, and he works closely with Ian Renshaw and Keith Davids um,
Right
the
on.
usual crew of ecological researchers.
And don't you, if I'm mistaken in this, don't you have a something that you have on your website to like little,
Yeah, if you're there's two things. So
you can go ahead and
the
plug all your
3D
stuff.
model, yeah.
Seriously, man,
So
go ahead. Where do we find you?
I
What do
have
you got?
I summarize things for the constraints led approach. I summarize it down into what I call scalable live training. Um, I'm not in love with the name, so I might change it. But scalable live training is just basically the broad idea of scaling games, keeping things live while also facilitating skill acquisition or skill adaptation rather at appropriate developmental levels for a given athlete. If you are a coach and you're starting out, a lot of coaches are like, I love this works, but I have no idea what my job is anymore, right? So if you're kind of lost there, I put together what I call the 3D model of coaching, and so you can find that on my website as well. Those are not you don't have to give me your email or anything; you just read them there. But I have what I call the transfer cheat sheet, and this is really just a quick and dirty list of things to keep in mind when you're developing your exercises for training to understand if it has a high probability of transfer to whatever performance environment that you
Oh,
want to
nice.
have
That's
that
cool.
expressed in. So you can go to combatlearning.com/newsletter. And that is, you have to sign up for the newsletter for that one, but I'll send it to you. Yeah. And if you don't get it, let me know because my email service provider is being stupid and I'm in the process of changing it. So
Right on, man. Well,
yeah,
I know we talked about some of the basic stuff, and I'd love to geek out with you at some point and go like super deep dive.
sure.
But we could do that for another day. And if you got any questions, like medically, you could always just send me a DM on it on Instagram or whatever, and I'm here
Cool.
for you, dude.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate it, man. We'll see you. Have a good
Yeah, thanks
night.
for having me on. You too.